A gruesome, heartbreaking videotape.
His last words were, "I wish I had more time to see my family."
A failed hostage rescue attempt inside Syria.
It turned out that the hostages were no longer at that location.
And a worldwide wake-up call about an Islamist terror group said to be more extreme and dangerous than Al-Qaeda.
No just God would stand for what they did yesterday and what they do every single day.
And in 1 week's time, the threat from the terror group called ISIS no longer seems limited to faraway Iraq and Syria. In a bulletin Friday, Homeland Security said ISIS supporters are calling for attacks inside the U.S., although there are no credible threats at this time.
So yes, they are an imminent threat to every interest we have, whether it's in Iraq or anywhere else.
An American having his head cut off. An American fighting alongside the killers and cowards from ISIS meets a dead end in Syria. And as we hear more about the possibility of these homegrown terrorists coming back to haunt us, the president takes time to try and cement his legacy with another executive order. Nothing about protecting Americans, but focusing on climate change. So much to discuss. Welcome back to MidPoint. Former governor of the state of Virginia, now president and CEO of the Free Congress Foundation, former member of the intelligence community, Governor Jim Gilmore. Governor, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you, Ed.
Governor, here we have a gentleman, Douglas MacArthur McCain, who now has gone over. He fights with ISIS. He is killed. Why are we, or why should we, in any stretch of the imagination, be shocked that there are American citizens who are joining a terrorist organization? It's not as if this would have just snuck up and it's the only time it happened. We had to be aware of this.
I think that we have to be aware that there are strange Americans who have strange ideas that would travel all across the world and do counterproductive things. Now, I think the beheading we saw ought to warn Americans that they don't need to join into these kinds of radical organizations that are contrary to the interests of the United States. At the end of the day, people who are American citizens have to remember that they're Americans and not be engaged in this kind of conduct. And Ed, in a larger sense, this shouldn't be happening at all. The president has demonstrated a weakness. He's demonstrated that he isn't interested in really trying to create any stability either in the Middle East or anywhere else. He sends a constant message of weakness. As a result, you see ISIS begin to emerge, and that's not the only problem that we see in the world today.
How then do we take that from the administration's lack of effort here to basically do something against ISIS when it comes down to Americans who see their own weakness at home and then decide this is a group that I want to fight with? How do we start to correlate all that?
Well, you know, I was chairman of the National Commission on Homeland Security for the United States for 5 years, and I was governor of the state of Virginia during that time, during the 9/11 attack. So I've seen all of this firsthand, and I've set up a framework that I think that creates some touchstones to give us a strategic environment in which we can make some decisions. And one of those touchstones is we have to have a good conversation with the American people. We have to explain whose side is on whose side here, and also prepare the American people for the potential of another terrorist attack in this country. Not allow there to be any kind of extreme response. But now, on the other hand, I think we have to have a decisive foreign policy that's active. It can't be a pullback foreign policy, which is what the president has been doing. And by the way, what Rand Paul has been advocating as well. Just as recently as several weeks ago, he said he would not support any kind of airstrike against the ISIS army over there. And then, of course, when the president did do begin some of that to slow them up, then Rand Paul turned around and said, well, maybe that'd be okay. So we have to send a decisive message here that people who attack Americans and attack American interests will be retaliated against.
Governor, with all of your experience that you've had, how do we then start to do a better job to identify the homegrown terrorists, the ones who, like this man, are enamored, if you will, of going overseas and becoming part of an organization that they know is nothing more than a band of brutal killers? How do we find them?
You know, it's a great question. And I just, in the Steamboat Springs Institute in Colorado, had a little discussion about this very point, as a matter of fact. Now, let's be clear. I'm not in favor of the National Security Agency spying on all of our personal emails or our correspondence or any of that kind of thing. But I have asserted that we have a technological advantage in this ongoing war against the terrorists and against these kinds of organizations. And that is the ability to reach in and find out who they're talking to, who their connections are, and make sure that we can map all of that and do something to protect the people of the United States. So people are trying to give you a false choice. You can either have liberty or security. I think it is a false choice. We can have both. We can make sure our people are safe and have privacy, and at the same time, we can look into these very people you're talking about and make sure they don't get back into the United States and do something to attack their fellow Americans.
How do we then, and you just bring up a great point here, but how do we use this technological advantage legally when so many times we find that it runs afoul of the law, and there are people, a lot of groups, who will say, we don't want you looking at all. There's nothing you can do, zero. We don't want you touching us. So how do we then use it? It seems as if out of every 100 things that you could use technologically, maybe you can only use 2 or 3 of them and actually do it legally.
Oh, it's just once again, it's just a great discussion to be having. I believe that the high technology that Americans have are the international advantage that we have in this ongoing war and this upcoming crisis that remains ahead of us, that is so represented by people like ISIS. I believe that you can have a database that explains simply where connections are without looking into those communications at all, without an appropriate suspicion, court order, and presentation. Now, yet I will say this, I am very critical of people in the Congress and people in the FISA courts that are so untransparent, and they're not prepared to say what their standards are, and they're not prepared to do proper oversight of NSA. I believe if you do correct oversight, you don't have to give away the technological advantage, and we can look into these communications by these potential dangerous people, and we can protect the American people, and I'm committed to it. And I think we need presidential leadership right now to address these issues. It's all just being ignored right now by the president, and that just fosters these kinds of problems.
Who are the people or the groups that are stopping this from happening?
Stopping
having this sort of a database, taking care of this, making all this happen. What's stopping us?
Well, no, we have that database. Now, I think the real issue today is how is this going to be used to make sure that we protect the privacy interests of the people of the United States.
Right.
But the capacity to get the information exists. Now we just have to say we have to have the will to do it to protect the American people, the technological advantages that are going to be in the long war that is ahead of us that will allow us to come out ahead, and at the same time protect the privacy and the interests of the people of the United States. Who's opposed to it? I think that there are people in this country that are very suspicious, that are very alarmed, and that there are unscrupulous politicians that want to take advantage of that sense of unease and paranoia in the body politic. I believe with real, deliberate assurance from presidential leadership, we can make it clear to the American people that we care about their privacy, we care about their liberty, but we also are not going to give away our advantages in the war ahead.
Governor, I only have about a minute left, and I hesitate almost to bring this up because it's emotional for me even to discuss, because I have a direct connection to this. But we are coming up on another anniversary of 9/11. How nervous, and I don't want to say scared, how nervous are you, and how nervous do you believe people are in the intelligence community that it's going to happen again, or at least someone will try?
As I said, I was chairman of the National Commission on Homeland Security for the United States for 5 years. Anybody that wants to see those reports, those official reports, can find them on the RAND Corporation webpage, Gilmore Commission. I believe, Ed, that there will be further attacks. The question is not whether that can happen, because it can't. The question is, what is our reaction to it? We have to deal with it and keep proportionality and perspective and understand that we are in a long war, and make sure that we don't give away our liberties or overreact in an authoritarian way here at home when these things happen. This too requires presidential leadership in order to have that conversation with the American people.
30 seconds. Are we ready?
Are we ready? No. We are not ready. And the reason we're not ready is because the enemy can always get in here and do something bad. The question is, are we mentally prepared? Just like we should have been in World War II, are we mentally prepared for the challenges ahead? We were then, we are not yet now. And that requires national leadership.
Governor Jim Gilmore, it is always a pleasure to have you on the show. I hope 9/11 passes without us thinking about it a second time. That would be my hope. Thank you so much for your time, sir.
Thank you, Ed.
All right, Governor Jim Gilmore makes us think a little bit. Later on this hour, pack your patience this Labor Day if you're hitting the roads, and perhaps maybe prep for a driverless car. Now that's scary. But when we return, a serious debate rages about whether sex offenders should one day be taken off the National Registry. A law scholar and advocate jump right into the MidPoint arena when we continue right here.